Hey guys, welcome back to our podcast. We're John and Anam, and we are talking about, a father figure and God being our father today. And this topic kind of came about like a few months ago, where I started thinking about like, why is it difficult for me to see God as a father?
Yeah.
As Christians, we see God as a father. It's there in the text. That God is our father. There's the Trinity, where it's the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So there's an obvious relationship right there, in terms of God being a father. And I started asking myself, like, why is it difficult for me to see God as a father? I feel like I don't know if it's suppressing it or I've been letting it go over my head, because I don't know how to make that connection maybe. But I asked myself, like, why is it difficult for me to make that connection? And so I started thinking about it. I did a little bit of digging, and I realized maybe it is how I see my father, like my exposure and my understanding of my biological father. But then also like my previous faith, you're not allowed to see God as a relational being, like a father. And so maybe I'm sure that has a lot to do with it as well. But right now I was working on how I'm seeing how I see my dad and how that relates to how I see God as a father.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So another component that kind of like catches or at least has caught our attention is the fact that a lot of people say Father, right, as they pray. And a lot of that is from the Lord's Prayer. So my Father in heaven. So you often refer to God, or people can refer to God as Father, but it's not always the case. And sometimes it could even be lost in terms of the deep sentiment behind it. Even if you're reiterating that prayer, or if you get caught up in the culture and feel like, okay, this is just what they do.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, I learned it in Spanish too. And so it's like, Padre nuestro que está en el cielo. Sometimes I blaze by that and I'm not entirely locked into what I'm saying. I'm just like, oh, this is like the email template that you have to do before you get into the meat of the subject.
Yeah.
But the thing for me is I actually have similarities with your story in terms of maybe I wasn't super close to my dad, but as we grew closer, and because of the original time that I had spent with him early on, I noticed that God created a foundation in my life where I saw my dad as like my hero in a lot of ways. I'm not saying that you didn't and that other people don't, but I was very attached to this idea that like, oh, my dad always has my back. Like I could tell him when I mess up, he won't shame me. I can bring up almost anything and he won't necessarily hold it against me. And yes, there's been a lot of moments in my life where I've messed up, and he has not held that over my head as if though like I'm a failure in any capacity. And so there's a couple of things that we want to be able to touch on and kind of like, dive into with you guys and see what you guys think about it. So let us know in the comments at some point if you guys can relate to any of the things that we're going to be talking about today.
So looking at like my relationship with my father, I love my dad. First of all, I want to say that, like, first and foremost, I love my dad. He has sacrificed so much for his family, and I feel like he's an awesome person. And I feel like our relationship is getting deeper. But as I was getting raised, like, and I'm sure some of you guys have this story, but my dad worked a lot. And it just felt like maybe, and I didn't know that this was going to impact me until like very recently, because I never, like, he didn't do anything wrong, he was just working. But I feel like because he was working, maybe that like our relationship, it could have been closer, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
Because the time that should have been there wasn't there, maybe. And I'm not resentful about it. I feel like as I'm getting older, I'm actually appreciating my parents more and more. And I think that's the crazy thing about it. It's like once you kind of like start looking into your parents and their story and things like that, you're like, wow, you guys are really powerful and like strong and courageous. Like I really see both of our parents like that. Like they went through a lot and they are doing amazing. But so as I'm growing older, like I felt like, again, this is stuff I'm thinking about now, but I didn't have those feelings as I was growing up.
Yeah.
But like I did feel like my dad genuinely loved me. He adored me. He did his best to show his affections towards me. It just that maybe the spending the time together wasn't necessarily there as much as it should have been. And I'm wondering if that's what's causing me to see God in a light, maybe like not as this father figure. Because I think to me, when people say, oh, God as a father, I'm just kind of like, I don't know what that means sometimes. And I also think a lot of it has to do with my decisions as I was getting older, like into my teens and young adult years. I personally got distant with my family because of a lot of things that I was going through. Teenage years aren't the best for many people. I think growing up in a different culture and then in America, it's like you're kind of balancing the two identities. So you kind of feel like you can't really relate to your parents as much because they're from this culture and you're growing up in this culture, but then you're kind of that culture, but then you're also not because you're Americanized. So there's just balancing the two. And I felt like I was getting distant from the identity that they raised me with. And because of that, you know, like I also had like attitude issues, things like that, like every teenager does. Thinks that they know everything, that they know better than their parents and whatever. Not that like your parents know everything perfectly, like the best, but like you know, like we have pride issues and things like that. And I think that's what got me a little bit more distant from my family. And luckily enough, that's when God was pursuing me during the time where I was getting a little distance from my family and from my dad. And when I reflect on it, I'm just thinking like, wow, God was there.
Yeah.
Like, again, I didn't know this then, but like God was there and he was protecting me and he was nurturing me and he was being kind to me, even though I felt like he wasn't. He was disciplining me, all this stuff. And I kind of just started to lean into God a little bit, but it was still difficult for me to see God as a father. So as God is pursuing me, you know, I went through a very difficult time because the faith that I was pursuing was Christianity, and that wasn't the faith that I was coming from.
Yeah.
And when I finally made the decision to convert, unfortunately, I did lose my family. Not permanently, but I did lose them. And I feel like initially I was very angry at God. So it became even more difficult to see him as a father.
Yeah.
And I'm still working through that. And I'm still like, you know, healing is a process. It's always going to be a journey. I also think that certain lifestyle choices, belief systems, things like that can permanently change relationships, and that's okay. I have to come to an acceptance of that. But the crazy thing was my dad pursued me.
Yeah.
And in a million years, I was not expecting that. And maybe it had to do with how I grew up and our relationship initially. He always was kind and nice and did a lot, but I didn't ever think he would pursue me, you know? And that genuinely took me like by surprise.
Yeah.
I was shocked. I was just in awe. I still can't process it, honestly. Like I'm still processing it. I can't fathom it. Like, to me, I think God did that for a reason. God allowed it for a reason because he knew I needed my dad.
Yeah.
Like he knew that my dad would be able to show me the love, the kindness, the patience, the mercy, the grace, all of these characteristics that we see about God as a father. Like my dad was wanting to show up in that way and exemplify it to me that way so that I can then see God as that. I did not think that I would ever see my family again. And I feel like because my dad showed up, it kind of changed everything for me.
Yeah.
And when he showed up, I still was having a difficult time seeing God as a father because I didn't process it.
Yeah.
And I feel like with everything that he was doing to show that he wanted to mend a relationship, to, because at the end of the day, like, my dad pursued me because I'm his daughter. He cares about me. He loves me. He wants to see me happy. He wants to see me safe, and all of this stuff, like, you know what I mean? Like, what a parent would want for their child, you know? And my dad did take a lot of pain for that. He took a lot in terms of like grieving, pain, things like that. And I have to commend him for that. I'm still just like, wow. Like, and I just wonder, like, if my dad is able to do that, what is God doing?
Amen.
Right? And me and you have been kind of going through or gravitating towards the Old Testament and seeing Israel constantly doing things to hurt God. Not to hurt God, but like they are hurting God. They don't realize it, but they are.
Yeah.
And God constantly takes the pain, takes the what is it, like
hits
or whatever, blows, like, and keeps showing up and just, I don't know what it is about that just makes me feel like, how's that possible?
And so what she's talking about right now, like, it's kind of weird. My two favorite books are Hosea and Jeremiah. I read a lot of Jeremiah right now, and in that there's a lot of like idolatry. Israel is literally like putting every single god before God, lowercase g over big G. And it's like, it's insane because when I read it, I was talking to my dad about Hosea like a couple months ago, and he was like, see, the thing is, that's us. We're always apostatizing. We're always putting things before God. And it could be the simplest things. It could be like, I want to work out, or I want to pursue friend groups. And that's kind of what I got caught up in. You're right. We have that teenage phase. We tend to think like, you know what, our parents will last forever. Reality check does set in eventually. And you start realizing, I don't have as much time with them as I thought. And now my prayer every day is like, Lord, extend their lives. Forgive me for everything that I did, because I don't really know how to like process the fact that I spent 10 years of my life neglecting them, pursuing other gods, pursuing things that aren't necessarily in accordance with what God in heaven had in store for me, like my father, my biological father on earth, who sacrificed so much for me. And I see that in your dad. You're talking about coming from a different culture. You're talking about coming from a different faith. And for him to have to process that, that's difficult, to say the least. And when we met, we had a moment where he opened up a bit about how he wanted me to protect you. And I think a little bit of backstory from my dad's side, I was able to understand what the role of a father was, because my dad was like just not wanting to not be there with me. I have such a need to have a baby boy or baby girl at this point, because I'm like, everything that my dad taught me, I want to be able to relay that. I want to have that same relationship with them that my dad was able to bestow on me. And that protector and provider thing, I kind of spoke to you about this earlier, but it's not really necessarily like the material goods that they're able to provide, the amount or like a quantifiable, I guess, number, but it's more so that they give it all. And I saw that that's what your dad did. Not only did he protect and provide up until a certain age, but then he went beyond that, and he chose to make sure that the mantle was passed to somebody who was really willing to. And I think that's how we could see God, the Father. Like, not only is he giving us the opportunity to be fathers and even mothers and look after others, right? But he's also like, listen, not only that, but I will still always be there. So there's days where your dad hits us up and he's like, you guys good? I got you right now. I could buy you this. I could do this. I'll pull up right now. And I'm like, dang, son, like, this guy is intense. And I love him all the more for it, because sometimes society loses sight of why fathers are necessary. Sometimes Father's Day isn't necessarily as appreciated. That's not any shot at Mother's Day, because I love my mom too. It's just some of the behind the scenes stuff that
Yeah.
I thought were just being handled by life, right?
Yeah.
Some of the subtle things that like I've learned to adapt to and grow up with, some of the principles that I currently have now, that came from my dad.
Yeah.
But we forget that, and we don't give them as much acknowledgement or as much affirmation of being a good father. Sometimes they're in the cut helping,
Yeah.
but then at the same time they're in the background not receiving any affirmation for any of the stuff that they've done for us. And me and Anam spoke about being the prodigal kids, I guess, where we abandoned and then still they pursue us. And in the Bible it speaks about when the prodigal son returned from all their stuff, all his stuff, right? The dad saw him from a far off way. In other words, he was always waiting, always expecting, always hoping that one day he would return.
He allowed us to make that decision
Facts.
to go off. He gave us that choice.
And one thing that I'm not gonna lie, sometimes I like downplay seminary because I'm like, no, I really want to. I don't like the idea of the boastfulness of it, which can become a thing in a lot of different ways. But one thing that it showed me that I'm really appreciative of is back then it was disrespectful to ask for your inheritance in advance, because you only get it when the person passes away. So it's kind of like saying, yo, you're dead to me. Give me my money.
Yeah.
I want to go do my own thing. And what that means is living with you isn't as worthwhile as if I were to just live my own life. So I'm going to go do that. That's kind of how I perceived my 10 years of missing out opportunities with my parents. And I know that you've had similar experiences where you feel like maybe you could have had more time. And now we're both like grieving the past and trying to embrace the present because there's no replacing them.
Yeah. And honestly, that, like, just the examples of our own fathers and everything that they have done and how we're talking about them and seeing them right now. And then also like the examples of father figures in the Bible, like you see these obvious characteristics of like showing favor,
Yeah.
right, to their children, or sometimes even their chosen children. And what I mean by chosen is like Joseph or Isaac or whoever, like things like that. And it just reminds me of like how much, like, because I wonder why God, you know, uses these relationships, like where his children, he's the father, right? He even uses like the church is the bride, he's the bride, like Christ is the bridegroom, like all these relationships to maybe help us better understand through those characteristics of what a father is. Like that's who he is, but he's even more. He's the perfect version of that.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, for sure. And like for me, it's a template thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes God is perceived in a way where he's disconnected. He's not really here for us. He's not as relational, and everything in the Bible is saying, no, you got it backwards. Like he is extremely relational. He pairs it to so many different types of relation. There's aspects in the Bible where it says God is like a mother. And all these things are needed to be able to help us develop an understanding of who he really is.
Yeah.
Because when we see the aspects of our dads, right, we get a better vision on who he is. And for me, that's really what happened. Like I was able to see who God was primarily through how my parents raised me and how they treated me. And then how my dad treated me made me see the paternal aspects of God, some of the characteristics that God has. And we've heard this like not that long ago, but like when we are younger, like very, very young, we can't conceive the idea of a God. We're still learning about ourselves. We're still learning about the people around us who are protecting us and such. And through that, they're interceding on our behalf, and they're kind of the bridge for us to God. So that's why it's so relevant to be a good father.
Yeah.
And my dad kind of passed down some of those characteristics to me. A lot of people are like, oh, you're patient or you're funny. And I'm like, my dad is patient and he's a clown. And so like I naturally have some of these joyful elements within me.
Yeah.
I have these long suffering moments that I endure because I see that he's done it. He set forth the example, and I'm like, okay. And then when I read in the Bible, oh, God is long suffering. I'm like, well, that's interesting. My dad is long suffering. I'm like, is there a connection there? And then I start seeing like, oh, I see. You're my father. This is the father you gave me, but we're all his children, and he cares for us all. And it's a beautiful thing to be able to have a dad. And I know that's not the case for everyone. There's certain roadblocks in the way sometimes that can cause us to even not necessarily be in relation with our fathers, even when we do have them.
Yeah.
And my heart goes out to people like that, because I decidedly chose not to, engage with my dad for such a long period of time. And some people don't even have that option. But one thing that I had mentioned to you prior was the idea of a genogram is really important, because you get to backtrack through some of the messiness of your family. I know that I had to figure out what's going on where, and until you kind of like figure out those intricate little details of where you're coming from, what was some of the difficulties in your parents' lives, some of the baggage that they carried, some of the things that you carry, some of the things that they've inherited, but basically the family dynamics, until you figure out what is blocking you from being close to your father, or even having a relationship with God as a father, it's hard to move forward in a relational way. And Satan will also interfere in a lot of moments to be able to close off those opportunities, so you never get that deep needed reconciliation that we all need to our fathers. So yeah, it's important. I just think it's important to have that opportunity to be able to reconcile and come to a point where you can see God as a father.
And what you're saying is like, not everyone has a father. Not everyone knows who their father is. Not everyone has the best role model. Like in terms of their biological father. So if that's your situation, what at least we encourage you to do is maybe find a father figure, someone who can be that role model,
a mentor,
as a father, and that they are living that like Christian life, with specific traits that you see God being described as a father. It is unfortunate, honestly, that we couldn't appreciate our dads, but I'm happy that we are coming to appreciate them a lot more now. And I think it's also unfortunate that some people want to appreciate having a dad, but then they don't get the opportunity to. And that's where looking for a father figure would be helpful. And then honestly, trying your best just to see God as a father, because, but I will say it is difficult to see God as a father when you don't have a good father figure in your life. And that's why pursuing that father figure, like, in the current relationships that we have, or maybe someone new that you just admire and you're like, what, I'm going to ask them to be like, my mentor. Things like that would be really helpful, because we do hear all these terms being used, like daddy issues, things like that, and mommy issues or whatever. And you're right that when we're kids, we don't have a concept of God, but our first loves are our parents. Our parents aren't maybe there, or they're not maybe acting the way that they should be as a mother and father to the best of their ability. It does get difficult to see them as like caretakers, as people who genuinely like love us the way that God loves us. And I think that's how I kind of, not like because my dad wasn't like that, but like the way that maybe I saw my dad, because of the distant nature of our relationship in the beginning of my life, is like why it's impacting me. So I can't imagine what it would be for people who didn't have a dad in their life, or had a dad that wasn't good to them, and how that's impacting them seeing God in their life.
And one thing I want to encourage for anyone out there, because I know anyone out there who feels like they can be a mentor to someone, do it. Just pray to God about it, but move forward if you feel peace in that, because there's a lot of people that I'm meeting who you just say what up, and they're like, hey, and it brightens up their day, and
Yeah.
it may mean not too much to you. Like, it's not like it wastes energy to be able to
Yeah.
interact, engage, and affirm, right? But for them, it's everything. It's like, yeah, I remember that time that John gave me dap, or like played ball with me, or whatever, like anything. And I know a couple of people my age who are great leaders, and maybe they're not ready to be like having a kid per se, or adopting, or even they feel maybe a little scared of mentoring because of, oh, maybe I'm not qualified to do something like that. But like literally, God will use everything that you have and all the different instances that he can provide for you to be a mentor to others. So like, don't shy away if you yourself didn't feel like you had a father. That's an opportunity to learn to be a father. I'm learning that like I missed out on so much of my time with my dad, but God is bringing me back into a place where I'm teaching things that maybe I lost opportunities to learn.
So I wanted to kind of go back to speaking about a little bit about how I'm seeing God as a father through the relationship that I am building with my dad, and the restoration that I see happening in my life. I feel like, so I'm just going to read this off. So I feel like what my dad is doing in terms of the pain that he endured from the decisions that I made, the love that he has to forgive me and accept me, is just an inkling of the love that God has for me. My dad genuinely did sweep me off my feet when he came back into my life. And now I'm starting to understand through this love, the love that God has for me, how much he wants to sweep me off my feet, how much he constantly forgives me, how much he loves me and protects me and respects my decisions and still goes ahead of me. God is the ultimate father. I'm so grateful he gave me an earthly father like my dad, who can show me so much love that I'm speechless and that I can't even fathom the love that God has for me. God is my father. He protects me. He provides for me. He disciplines me. He forgives me. He comforts me. He sustains me. He nurtures me. He cares for me. He covers me. He soothes me, and he has patience for me. I cannot explain my life without my father, both my earthly and heavenly fathers. I cannot explain how I'm even here. If it wasn't for them pursuing me, I'm not sure where I would be. And now that my relationship with my dad is being restored, I see God as a restorer. Like, he wants to restore the relationship that I have with him, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I guess like the prodigal son story, when he was coming back, he appreciated his father so much.
Yeah.
After taking his inheritance and doing whatever he wanted with it, he came back. His dad, open arms, just waiting for him, like kind of like on the like looking for him on the horizon. Now all I want to do is I want to pursue the restoration, that relationship with my dad. But now I'm even wanting to pursue the restoration with God as my father.
Yeah.
So here I said, this is just a little thing that I wrote to God. After everything you've done for me, God, you gave me my family back. Yes, there's still healing being done and relationships being built, but you are doing it. How can I show you the love that you've shown me? You saved me from myself. You gave me another life when I almost lost my old one. You showed me my new identity. And no, it's not really new. It was my original identity. I just didn't know it. It was the one that you gave me. And that I also see that you have all these plans for me and all these purposes, that I'm not lost when I'm with you, and that I'm my fullest self when I have you. And I just feel honestly like so blessed that he gave me my dad in the way that he did, because now I see him as that father. And I have to keep reminding myself, God is perfect in everything that he does. He's a perfect father. He's a perfect quote unquote bridegroom. He is a perfect just everything. And so all these relationships, the love, the care, the patience, the kindness, all these things are just an inkling of the love, the patience, the care that God shows for us. And I can only imagine, if my dad is capable of this, how much is God?
Amen.
Right? How much is God pursuing me and taking care of me and all that?
So one of the last components that I wanted to say before we cut out is one of the major things that I've seen in fathers, good fathers, has been a dying to self. It happens to be that that's also the same thing that, not happens to be, but That's what a good husband is also. He is self-sacrificing. He lays everything out on the line for his family. And that's what I see in God the Father. That's what I saw in my father. Anything and everything. It didn't matter how much it was just how much. I have 2 dimes. That's all I got, but it's all yours. And I really appreciate having seen that, because now I know what God does for me. What my dad exemplified, I am now to do. But this is also just a reflection and a small microcosm of what God the Father has already done for us. He put it all on the line for us so that we may be redeemed, so that we may have a new life, like you mentioned, so that we could be happy. And that's one of his biggest joys, living with him in joy. That's what makes him the happiest.
So to kind of wrap it up, we have this appeal that we wrote. Basically, what we wrote is give the people in your life a chance. They may shock you. They may support you in the things you didn't think that they could. Don't take their opportunities away to be in your life. And honestly, that's how we should see God. Even if we don't feel him or trust him, give him a chance. He loves you and is so concerned with you, and he will surprise you. And this goes for everyone who have amazing father figures, not the best father figures, or no father figures. Try your best to see God as a father, and that could be through reconciliation with your own biological fathers or the father figures that you did have in your relationship that you no longer have, or pursuing a father figure through mentorship or in your church or whatever it may be, discipleships type of stuff.
Yeah. And we just want to say thank you. I know this was a deep topic to have. Processing this might take a lot, because Anam and I have been processing this for quite some time. But this was something that was heavy on our hearts. So we really appreciate that you were able to join us on this. If you're struggling in this capacity, we will be praying for you. But I want to encourage you to take a little bit of time to pray on this for yourself, to be able to invite the Holy Spirit to move, because God is willing now more than ever to just bring you closer to him and to be a guiding force in your life through individuals that you can look up to. So on that note, thank you for being with us. Peace.
Bye, guys.